What's up guys, it's John from Outlier, and today I'm going to teach a beginner's lesson in classical Chinese. If you know a bit of modern Chinese but you don't know any classical Chinese at all, or if you know some but you need a refresher, this will be perfect for you. And actually, if that's you, let me know in the comments. So I'm going to be teaching lesson 1 from Michael Fuller's book, An Introduction to Literary Chinese, which I think is an outstanding introduction to the classical language. We're actually going to read 2 short but famous passages from the Analects of Confucius, or 论语as it's called in Chinese. First, I'm going to talk about the most basic sentence pattern you'll encounter in classical Chinese, and then I'll move on to explaining the text itself. Now, if you're interested in learning classical Chinese, I highly recommend checking out our courses, Intro to Classical Chinese and Intermediate Classical Chinese. In these courses, I teach through most of Fuller's textbook, explaining difficult grammar and vocabulary along the way. You'll also read a few texts from outside Fuller's book, and I'll also show you resources that will help you to get through difficult passages on your own. By the end of the course, you'll be at a solid intermediate level in classical Chinese, and you'll also have the tools and knowledge to keep developing your skills on your own if you want to go further. There's a link in the description, and you can use the discount code Classical Chinese to get 30% off either course, or both, or even both courses plus our early Chinese history course, which also includes a bunch of classical Chinese readings. All right, on to the lesson. So I think Fuller in this chapter on nominal and verbal sentences, I think he basically does a pretty good job of explaining this stuff. There is some stuff that I want to cover that he doesn't quite talk about. I mean, he talks a little about in the sketch of literary Chinese, where he talks about topic comment structure, but I just wanted to go into that a little bit more today, because this topic comment thing, it's a little unusual for us if you're a native English speaker or, of any European language, really, I think. Topic comment is a different type of sentence structure than what we're used to. We're used to subject predicate, right? Where every sentence has to have a subject, even if it's implied, and then it has a predicate. In classical Chinese, there are subject predicate sentences, I should say subject predicate and topic comment are tools that you can use to analyze a sentence. But as we'll see, topic comment is extremely common. And if you're not familiar with what that means, you'll become a lot more familiar with it over the next few weeks. So don't worry too much. But a basic sentence pattern in classical Chinese is this: a, ja, bi, ye, right? So ja marks the topic. So whatever comes before ja is the topic. And ye marks the comment. So whatever is between ja and ye is the comment. And if you want to think of it as like as for, so as for A, B is the case, right? If you're familiar with Japanese, the pattern would be A, wa, B, dot, or B, des, which is like the basic sentence pattern in Japanese, right? And it's functionally exactly the same as a, ja, bi, ye. So when you encounter a sentence that has these particles, it'll help you to make sense of the sentence structure, right? You can know that this is the topic because it precedes ja, and then this is the comment because it is ye. So if we take this as for A, B is the case, right? So this is A and this is B, right? So now we just have to figure out what A is. So in this case, so this character whenever you see that in classical Chinese, it's a marker of verbal coordination. That means you're going to have a verb in front of it and a verb behind it. Now, in this case, it's pretty clear where the verbs are. This is a verb and this is a verb, right? Sometimes you'll have other stuff in between. So, you could have stuff in between and then like this, right? But seeing this character means you need to look for the 2 verbs that it's marking coordination between. And what type of coordination, it really depends on context. So it's not something that R makes explicit. We'll get exposed to a lot of different types of coordination, but a lot of times you have to figure out what it is from context. In this case, this is to be born, right? Sheng. And this is to know, right? So we can translate it as like to be born and to know, or to know as a result of being born, something like that. So the verbs are coordinated in some way. And this j is basically a placeholder for a direct object. So normally you translate it as it or he or she. There's three main uses of j that we'll encounter in this course. But this is one of them. And it's one that, if you were to choose a direct modern Chinese equivalent of this use of j, I would say it's ta, right? So it's basically it, he, she, or it. So then we can say, okay, to be born and as a result, to know it. Now, what is it in this context? Well, the text doesn't say it, right? But we can say like things, right? Is probably what's being got at. Now we could go earlier in the text and see what the context is, and maybe that would make it more explicit what exactly this it is referring to. But for our purposes today, it's really not that important. To be born knowing it, right? And that's the topic. Now, ja tends to nominalize things. And what nominalize, like, I don't think Fuller really explains this, if I remember right, but to nominalize something just means to turn it into a noun, right? So this would be a verbal phrase, to be born and to know it. Ja nominalizes it. So being born and knowing it, that's now a noun phrase, right? And then we go to the comment, sheng. In this context, it means best, or it's highest, right? It's the best situation. So being born and knowing it is best, right? And I've got a very, stilted, very close translation here, but a more smooth translation in English would be being born and knowing it is best. It being whatever, knowledge, And with that knowledge that we weren't born knowing, but now we do know because we've learned it, we can move on to the main text, text number 1, right? And this shows up on page 42. And it becomes pretty easy to decipher this text because these 3 lines basically all have the same pattern, right? So Kongzi is Confucius. Yue said. Confucius said. A lot of times in 论语, you'll just see this, 子曰, and that it means the same thing. In 论语, it means Confucius said, right? But 孔子曰, 生而知之者, 上也. So that's the one we just looked at. Being born and knowing it is best. And you can see this is exactly the same pattern. Something 而知之者, and then 次也, right? So 学, in our case, to study or to learn. To study and then know it is next. So 次. In Mandarin, you have like 第三次, right? It means the third time. In classical Chinese, usually it means next. And actually, if you look at the traditional way of writing this character, when I say traditional, I just kind of mean a little more old-fashioned, but also it's the standard in Taiwan. That left side component is actually meaning to, and that's where it gets its meaning next. Okay. 学知之者次也. So to study and then know it is next. Now, Confucius isn't like passing judgment on people that aren't born with innate knowledge, right? That's not what he's saying. What he's doing here is he's setting up a hypothetical it would be best if we could be born knowing stuff, right? But that's obviously not possible. So what's our next best option? Well, to study and then know it, or to learn and then know it, right? After that, 困而学之，又次也. So 困, Fuller translates it as to be blocked or oppressed or in difficulties. And then in the notes, he says, I think he says to be perplexed. To be perplexed and then learn it. Let's just stick with to have difficulty, right? So to have difficulty and still learn it. So people take this to be the lowest. So this phrase is, syntax is a little bit odd. But like I said, a lot of times if the author thinks that a grammatical particle isn't necessary to understand it, a lot of times they'll omit it. And I mean, this is a phrase you can kind of figure out what it means without that E, right? People this to be lowest. It's not that big of a jump from that to people consider this to be the worst. But yeah, I just wanted to show that kind of E there. I think that's sort of implied in the sentence. And I'm going to point out things like this from time to time where I think like this ja, right? Ja could also be here, right? So from time to time, I'll point these things out where I think there's an implied particle, because when you're reading stuff for yourself, it can really help to make sense or to parse sentences that you're looking at by looking for places where a grammatical particle could go. And a lot of times that will clarify the syntax of the sentence for you. Okay, so let's go through one time smoothly. Confucius said, to be born knowing it, or to know it as a result of having been born, is best. To study and then know it is second best. To have difficulties and still study it, well, that's next after that. To have difficulty and not study, people take this to be the lowest, right? And I personally think Fuller chose this text to open the course with, just because it underscores that, traditional Chinese value of, diligence and study. And we'll see, another traditional Chinese value in the second text of humility. This is the second text. I've put the name, I've underscored the name here. And I just want to mention, names in classical Chinese can be a massive source of frustration. If you're reading a raw, unpunctuated text, especially, a lot of times if you don't know something's a name, it will give you fits until you finally figure out that it is a name, right? Now, a lot of modern annotated and punctuated versions of texts will underline names, or they'll put a little squiggly line underneath. Or if the text is vertical, like in Taiwan, they'll put a squiggly line to the left-hand side of names or of proper nouns in general. So I've added that here. So again, we have 子曰, Confucius said, 孟之反. So that's the name. He's an official in Luguo, which is a state in the spring and autumn period, and also in the Warring States period. It's the same state that Confucius is from, actually. So 孟之反不发. In this context, it means to boast or to claim unearned merit. Now, normally it means to attack. And this meaning of to boast or claim unearned merit is a very unusual meaning for this character. And so that's what the little asterisk next to it on page 43, that's what that means. It's an unusual meaning for the character. You don't need to bother memorizing it, right? But okay, so 孟之反不发, so he doesn't boast or he doesn't claim unearned merit. 奔而颠, so 奔 means to flee or to retreat. Is that marker of verb coordination. So what that tells us is dian, even though dian is normally a noun, which means like the rear guard of an army, here it's acting as a verb. And we'll talk more about parts of speech next week and how, things that are normally nouns can act as verbs oftentimes. But here it's a verb because it comes after that right? So here it means to serve in the rear or to be in the rear guard. So we can say that this the coordination between these two verbs is probably temporal, right? It's a time thing. While retreating, he was serving in the rear guard, right? 将入门, so 入门 just means to enter the gate, right? Not a door here, a gate. Probably city gate as he's retreating from battle. So 将, and we'll see this several times in the course, 将 just means to be about to do something. So 将入门, as he was about to enter the gate, 策骑马. So again, like I said earlier, 骑 is sort of a possessive. So usually translate 骑 as his, hers, or its, right? So he whipped his horse, 策骑马, 曰 and said. And this is a quote by Meng Zhifan, right? Well, let's get rid of that just for the sake of cleanliness. So, and he said, 非敢后也. So it is not, and we'll talk more about negation in a few weeks. There's a lot of different like negative or ways of negating things in classical Chinese, but a lot of times you can think of fei as like, it's not the case that such and such, whatever happens. So it's not the case that I dared to be in the back. And again, this is, ho is normally a noun. It's a place, right? Or we would think of it as preposition. But here it's acting as a verb. So it's not that I dared to be in the back. 马不进也. So it's that I couldn't get my horse to advance, right? I couldn't get my horse to go. Okay, so a little smooth translation really quickly. Confucius said, Meng Zhifan is not boastful or doesn't claim unearned merit. While retreating, he served in the rear guard. As he was about to enter the gate, he whipped his horse and said, it's not that I dared to be in the back. It's that my horse wouldn't advance. I couldn't get my horse to go. Now, when I first read this text, I thought, I sort of misread the intention here. I didn't really get why Bufa was there. I thought maybe it was sarcastic. And my reading was, okay, they're retreating and he was in the back. He's a coward. And so when he gets to the city gate, he makes a show of whipping his horse and saying, oh, it's not that I wanted to, not that I was brazen enough to just be in the back. I'm not a coward. I just couldn't get my horse to move. I thought he, blaming the horse. But of course that doesn't make any sense, because if you think about what happens in retreat, they're retreating, right? And he's in the back where the enemy is, right? So he's closest to the enemy. So that's actually, those are the people most likely to get killed, right? So he is actually being very humble here. He's saying, it's not that I was so brave, it's not that I dared to be in the back or that I was brave enough to be in the back. I just couldn't get my horse to go. Now, we know that's probably not the case. He's probably just being humble here, right? And not boasting. He's not coming in and going, yeah, I was in the back, the most dangerous spot. Look at me, He's going, no, I wanted to be a coward. I just couldn't get my horse to go any faster, right? So, like I said, that traditional Chinese virtue of humility, I think is part of why he chose this for the first chapter of the book. Another thing I want to point out real quick is, and if you have any questions, please, feel free to type those in the chat box and I'll address them once I'm done with this. But something else I want to point out is this topic comment thing, right? This whole thing is the story that Confucius is telling, right? Now, in the book, Fuller has a period there, right? I've changed it to a comma. I have a little bit different preferences for punctuation than Fuller does. It's not really a big deal. There's different approaches to punctuating these texts. They're originally written without punctuation. But I turned it into a comma because I want to point out the fact that this is a topic, comment sentence. I mean, and the thing is, when you get used to seeing topic comment in classical Chinese, it'll help your modern Chinese a lot. Because if you've ever been reading something in Chinese and you have just this massively long sentence, it like takes up an entire page, and it's like, how are we still in the same sentence? Like, if I were writing this in English, it would have been 30 sentences by now, and that's because as long as the topic is the same, and I mean, to be fair, modern Chinese is less strongly topic comment than classical Chinese is, but it still absolutely exists, and you'll see it, and getting used to it in this course will really help you to see it when you're reading modern Chinese. As long as the topic of conversation is still the same, you can make as many comments about it as you want, and you don't have to start a new sentence. So this is, in English, we would say, 孟之反 isn't boastful. He, or while retreating, he was serving in the rear, right? So that would be a new sentence. We'd have the subject he. When he was about to enter the gate, he whipped his horse, right? And he said, blah, blah, blah. Now, that's not exactly the smoothest English ever, and a composition teacher might, not like that way of writing, but it's idiomatic, it's grammatical English. But in Chinese, we don't have to do that. We don't have to keep saying he, right? We have our topic here, 孟之反. And then we have a comment. He's not boastful. We have another comment. While serving in the rear, or while retreating, he was serving in the rear. Another comment. When he was about to enter the gate. Another comment. He whipped his horse. Another comment. And said this, right? So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 comments after that topic. And it's just one long sentence, right? So yeah, I wanted to point that out because it's something that being aware of will not only help you to make sense of classical Chinese sentences that you're reading, but it'll also help you a lot in modern Chinese. Okay, I think that's all I have about these texts. All right, so that was lesson 1 from Fuller's book, and it was actually an excerpt from our Intro to Classical Chinese course. So if you're interested in learning classical Chinese, go check that out. There's a link in the description. And that's all for today. Good luck in your studies, guys.